Beth is having surgery this morning, so I will run this little show today. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Hopefully you had a chance to look at the meeting minutes from last time. If there's any discussion, we can have that now, or we can move to approve those. Any discussion?
I would move to approve.
Second? A second to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. I was trying to move quickly because we have a couple extra items that we'll give to Jesse right now on the forms he sent out, what, about an hour and a half ago? All right.
I'm sorry. My phone is just ringing. The voicemail is not picking up for whatever reason. And so I apologize for that. I may just have to hang up on this person. I don't know. There we go. Hey, it died. Okay, so briefly, we are prepping the fiscal year 22 annual report document, which is for those who are currently receiving funding. Sorry, member of the public. And then fiscal year 23 contract template is something else I sent over to you. We are trying to finalize. I'm sorry, I'm so thrown off. We're trying to finalize that as well. Just wanted to see if you all had any immediate thoughts or problems with it. I'm going to bring it up on my screen now, hopefully. Here is the contract. We'll go ahead and do that one first because that's what I saw first. Majority of this is pretty straightforward. Just fill in the blanks. We didn't change a lot of it from previous years. Compensation, that's all pretty straightforward. It's what you guys recommended and council approved. Acceptance procedure. This is different because it's a little kinder, might be a nice word to say, to the organizations. I don't, Lindsay may want to talk a little bit about the site visits section of it, because she is very interested in us doing that as a group, as a committee. But essentially, and we'll get to attachment A here in just a moment, but it just says that you have to do what's said in attachment A, and then you have to, we are potentially going to perform site visits and record reviews to assess how you're doing in the contract. And then if you don't deliver it, you may be prevented from consideration in the future. Yes, I'm sorry.
No, Jesse, that's great. If I could just chime in about the site visits itself, this is something that from the best of our knowledge has always been in the contract, but we have not necessarily formally arranged. We think that this is a great opportunity to have just kind of a wellness check and a welfare check to communicate with the organizations specifically, to talk to them about what's going well, what's going poorly, or what any great stories that they have from their end. We work with these organizations throughout the year on lots of different things, but having a formal kind of just check in with the organizations, I think, is a great idea, and especially an opportunity to engage committee members in the process. So there's an opportunity for the organizations to talk directly with committee members outside of the grant cycle. I think that this is a really great opportunity, especially going into the next couple of years, knowing that our cultural plan is being revised and the grant structures might change. We know we're going to a digital platform. So any opportunity to communicate directly with the applicants and recipients, I think, is a great, something that we shouldn't just leave on this paper contract, but something that we should actually engage. So for that, we may choose, or the committee could choose to have a subcommittee, or we can schedule them and put a call out to the committee to see who'd be interested and available to meet with organizations. We are tentatively kind of brainstorming that we would hold site visits or these check-ins in quarter 1 or quarter 4, knowing that quarter 2 and 3 are really heavily based on the grant cycle itself. So if we kind of did a beginning of the year check-in or an end of the year check-in, that would be perhaps the preferred time via the committee structure. Again, just throwing out this idea for discussion, and we're happy to entertain or organize or coordinate or just leave this as is, and we'll see where the next cycle takes us. But this will at least be on the contract for next year's recipients.
And we can discuss the site visits and committee and how we like to work that. We can do that now, or we can table that for another session. I'll leave that up to the group because we do have a full plate today. I don't know if we'll be able to get to both artist access or developing arts. Jump into everything.
Those are just on there sort of as these are what we're talking about or have been.
Well, we had a good discussion last time, and Sam did bring that up, that maybe we should take a deeper dive into those and how we can formalize those some more. Okay. So I'll leave that up to the group if we wanted to start discussing the site visits now or table that for next meeting.
I would rather table it.
Okay.
You got it. And then Jesse, as you're scrolling down, if you can highlight any other major changes, the only other thing that pops to my mind that the committee should be aware of is the distribution structure, the option to continue with the quarterly finances, biannual or annual.
I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly where that happened. Here. Yes. Can either a lump sum, semi-annual, or 4 equal installments.
So just
All
as an
presentation.
FYI, maybe the committee's aware of this, maybe not, but we currently operate on a quarterly structure. So regardless of the funding that the organizations receive, they submit an invoice to us quarterly, and we pay it against their contract essentially as the scope of work. I would say in the current year that we are in, we maybe have 1 or 2 applicants that actually sends us the quarterly invoices. In this structure, majority of them are sending us multiple at a time or forget, or how do we get paid? What is the process? For the larger organizations, I think the quarterly makes sense. For the smaller organizations that might be receiving $1,000 or up to $5,000, quarterly it's a lot of extra paperwork that perhaps is more cumbersome for the recipients, and it kind of clogs down our administrative flow as well. So we don't necessarily want to completely change it, knowing that some of them this works with their cash flow, but at least give them the opportunity to request a lump sum, semi-annual, or the quarterly installments. And this is something that we went back and forth with finance and law, and they're fine with any of these 3 options.
Sense good.
Okay, moving on. I just wanted to highlight page 4 here, scope of services.
Jesse, before you go back, I think your city clerk has changed. I think you need to update.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, these are, yep. Thank you. Here, I don't know that there were many, if any, changes. We just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of Exhibit A, which is sort of the performance measures.
So
Again.
I do have questions and concerns about this. I don't know when it changed. This is not what it used to be. Because these are the performance measures that we use to evaluate applications. They are not performance measures that necessarily relate to what the organizations have said they will be doing. That seems, to me, that feels like a real disconnect. And it goes back and it reinforces what we talked about in the last meeting, which is we are giving them operational grants, but then we're coming back and asking about a lot of things which really aren't necessarily operational. So mine only. I can tell you historically, these were tailored and the performance measures were unique to each organization based on what they said they would be doing with the money.
So this is Sam. So if we take that idea, then I guess it would either be that each of these needs to be much more customized, or else we need to just take it out.
And they used to be just customized, Sam. I think each organization had maybe 3 performance measures that were mutually agreed upon that became the assessment tool.
When did it get, when was it mutually agreed upon?
At the time the contract was being negotiated
Oh,
for the
okay.
language, it was based on what was submitted in the application and funded by the committee, because in many cases, it had to be negotiated because if an organization didn't get the full amount of money, then they would have to make decisions about how that funding would be adjusted for use.
So what is the purpose of having all of these essentially like application criteria posted in the contract to someone who's already been given an award? What's the purpose of including all this boilerplate?
That's my concern. I don't think it's relevant in the contract.
Yeah.
So we can definitely go back and look at historical data. I'm doing kind of just a spot check in our files, and Exhibit A was unchanged in 21 based on what we currently have on file. So it looks like the majority that I'm spot checking right now in our files all had the same performance measures that are reflective of the application. So we can dig a little bit deeper to see what they were historically, and this is where, to Jesse and I's knowledge, we just kind of rinsed and repeated. This is the same to the best of our knowledge, but we can definitely dig a little deeper accordingly.
I wonder if that was a COVID change. I think the last one that I was involved in filing was probably in 19, and this was not what it was.
Yeah, so I'm looking at 2020 right now, and they are all the same. Again, just from my spot checking, we'd have to dig a little bit deeper because I think that 2019 are all paper files. I don't think we have those scanned in, but we can definitely look. I will say, out of the respective time and where we are kind of in the process, getting closer to the end of the year, my recommendation would likely be to remove this section completely then, to, again, just not eliminate cumbersome additional paperwork as needed, knowing that the annual report would reflect perhaps what the committee's looking for. But we can definitely dig a little bit deeper and report back to the committee accordingly.
I mean, that makes sense. So Cynthia, just so I'm really clear, so your concern is that this kind of language actually does not help the partnership between the city and the recipient, and in fact, it's a little bit negative because it's just like white noise. Like, here's all these things you're supposed to be doing.
Right. I think up in an earlier section, there's a reference to performance objectives, but these are not performance objectives. These are the categories from the cultural plan on which we assess applications. Yeah.
So like, I don't see what including this gets us. And it sounds like there's potential for it to, there's evidence of the potential in being not helpful. So like, and in a way, I'm glad you raised that, because I had no idea, Cynthia, and that makes sense to me to be concerned.
I will just say I'm seeing this language in at least fiscal year 18 contracts.
Yeah.
But why does it matter what we've always done? What matters is, like, should we be doing it? I think that's really the question.
Sam, I hear you.
Yeah.
And what the initial goal for this contract was to just make something that worked because deadlines are coming up.
Right.
And that long term, we definitely did not want to just do things because it's the way that we've always done them.
Right.
That is another reason that we're bringing the contract to the group today.
Sure. Yeah. I don't think I saw this last year. I mean, I might have been asleep at the switch, but I don't think this is last year, I don't think we received this opportunity to see these things. So
no, in my 2 years, we have not seen this contract or even the next form that Jesse will go to.
Yeah. And I don't mean to be suggesting that more work needs to be happening. I guess I'm just kind of thinking like Cynthia raises a good point. If it's within our discretion, like, why not just take all this stuff out? That's simpler, you know?
Well, and if it is the spirit to simplify, just removing this attachment, I think takes us a step further.
Yeah.
So this is something that we can definitely run this inquiry by law. And Cindy, you perhaps have more background in this area than I do. I believe we have to have some sort of performance measure or scope of work, but knowing that the applicants put all of this in their application and the committee approved that, I think that we could tie that back to some sort of clause that says, as described in your application, this is what you agreed to. So we can reference as a performance measure, because we have to have some sort of scope of work in the operating or in this grant agreement.
Oh, okay.
So that's,
And that was really the essence of how it used to be. Again, appreciating we don't want to go back just because it was that way.
Sure. And part of the reason Jesse and I really wanted to make sure the committee saw this is because we don't know what we don't know. So that's, Cindy, your point is very well heard, and we appreciate that feedback.
I would like to say, just for the record, that these performance measures are straight out of the 2013 cultural plan addendum.
Mhm.
Right.
As I'm looking at old things, yes. So again, not saying that we need to keep doing these things this way, but that is where they are from.
Right. Yeah, I recognize them. It sounds like it's not. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sam.
I was going to say, it sounds like Cynthia has identified a step of the process that has disappeared that not all of us even are aware of. And that step could be valuable, but it's a lot of work, because customizing 24 contracts is no small thing based on agreed upon objectives.
Right. Well, and what I was going to add in there is that, yes, they are in the plan, but aren't they in the plan as basically how you qualify for funding and not how you're evaluated or how you use the funding, which is really what you're establishing in a contract.
I might agree with you in a particular way that might have been the initial intent, but whether or not that's the way it's been done, I can't say.
Good news is it gets solved in a new plan.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lindsay, you're going to check with legal about what we need to put in there and see if that little language you mentioned earlier will be sufficient for Exhibit A.
Yes.
Okay.
Cool.
Moving on, Jesse.
Yes. I'm gonna have to stop sharing for a moment because I'm not very good with Zoom as I find my other document. I have like 300 documents open. Please excuse me. This is very annoying.
Jesse, would you like me to share it?
Absolutely, because I can't find it on my list of screens.
All right. So are we all seeing the annual report worksheet?
No.
Oh, it helps if I actually click
Here
share.
it goes.
There we go.
No.
So
Yes.
this is maybe a
Alright.
good segue into, here's something that we absolutely can change within the current structure. Knowing that these funds have already been distributed, this is where we just, what does the committee want to know as kind of an overall feedback for the fiscal year, especially as we're still 2022 would have been considered a pandemic related year.
So this is for the recipients that we deliberated upon last year before you were in place, Lindsay and Jesse.
Correct. And I will say, so the semi-annual report is pretty comparative to this. We want to make sure that we're actually asking questions and tracking data that we can do something with, and then we're not just requesting superfluous things that we think would be helpful. Not to project that happened in the past, but we want to make sure that we request information that is helpful to moving the cultural plan forward and actually reflective of what the committee is interested in hearing. So this is Jesse put together this worksheet or this report worksheet. It would be due at the end of January, knowing that everyone's operations end 31 days before then. So total number of events or programs, attendance numbers, rental attendance. We separated these well, really all three of these with paid attendees, knowing that it's a little bit different for different organizations, especially ones that aren't a brick and mortar operation, that they might be a performance-based organization, but not with their own venue. So separating those out, I think, helps us track impact numbers a little bit differently. This is kind of just our check-in with, did you actually send us all the invoices? Because we've hound and nagged them quite a bit on submitting their invoices so we can actually pay them. AEP is in relationship to our Arts and Economic Prosperity Study, which I know is not directly related to the Cultural Funding Committee, but this is kind of just a reminder to them from the division standpoint that it's an ongoing thing that we want to make sure is still on their radar. And so if we go down into
Lindsay, could you just,
Yeah.
let me interrupt just a second. On the AEP 6, do you talk to most of the organizations we fund about that? Or is that mostly relevant to the city the organizations that are quasi-city getting the funding?
All organizations that receive funding are also fit the categories of the AEP requirements. So I would say,
I understand that they qualify.
Yes.
My question is, have you talked to them, or are they going to get this and be surprised and feel like they're not doing something they should have been doing?
No, they were
I
asked the
think-
same question on the semi-annual report.
Perfect.
And I've spoken with all of them individually and in group emails several times about the
Awesome.
project.
Awesome.
Great.
And ultimately, although it's not tied to their funding, and Cindy, to your point, we definitely don't want to make them feel like they're not doing something that could be jeopardizing their funding. We want to make sure that they know that the AEP is happening. So then when the results come, everyone in the community can use that data to help further their economic impact missions accordingly. So it's definitely a check-in moment for them, but again, it does not affect their funding.
Well, I love it's there. And I just wondered how much we've been encouraging people to participate.
I think I last emailed them maybe 2 weeks ago.
Quick question on the numbers section, just really briefly. I'm thinking of, I think it's art partners. Are they the ones who go into the schools and deliver curriculum to the kiddos there? Would they
Yes.
put their numbers served, under the attendance numbers?
I believe that's what they've typically been doing in their application for us.
Okay. Okay, so just want to make sure they see themselves and know how to respond appropriately. Thanks.
And I might pull up their semi-annual report just to confirm that. But while we're doing that, we can move on to the narrative sections. And I don't know that I need to read them out loud, but maybe for the record, did your organization achieve successes defined by the performance benchmarks listed in their application? So we don't want to define success for them, but have they reached successes they've defined it for themselves? Why or why not? What challenges, if any, did your organization encounter and how did you address them? If applicable, describe any notable acquisitions, loans, deaccessions in your collection. So that's really for any organization that has a collection.
Lindsay, could we pause on that a second? It
Absolutely.
seems to me most of the applicants, when they apply, say that's not applicable to them. Why do we then ask the question on the report?
Isn't it in the cultural plan?
Okay,
The decent section, I thought on that. I don't have it with me here in the office, but I thought there was, which I remember asking that question when I first came on this committee. I think we still have like what, 1 or 2 that it's applicable for, but for the vast majority, it's not. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So that could be potentially a holdover from the original 2008 plan where our cultural institutions could also apply for competitive funding. And then in 2013, they were removed from the competitive funding pool. And so that is the vast majority of our museums. I think that this form is, while primarily meant right now for the Cultural Funding Committee funding recipients, I think ideally would also go to our institutions. And so that question
Okay.
could apply more to our institutions than to the competitive funding recipients.
Yeah.
Sorry to bounce all over, but this was Arts Partners semi-annual report and they did track it in attendance numbers.
Okay, thank you. If they're good with it, I'm good with it.
45,000 for half the year, not bad.
Yeah, I think they just write down the entire school district though.
Could be, yeah.
So would it be requested that this section be removed?
I think it comes out if we need to have it in there because of the cultural plan for the time being until it gets changed out, I would leave it as is. Because who all do we have left? It is Ulrich and Mark Art. Are they the only two? I thought there was another one we had in there.
Well, the Kansas African American
African American
History.
Museum.
Yeah.
I believe there's a section in the application. No, apologize for my fervent scrolling that does talk about your collection if you have one. So I
Great
think
Plains
that's
too.
somewhere where
Yeah. It is in the application.
Yeah, it is a question. And I think there's also Great Plains Nature Center, right? They have.
Yes.
Theoretically, in the future, on something like submittable, we can just ask a question that says, do you have a collection? And if they say yes, then we can ask them, do you have
Mhm.
any, if they say no, they can breeze right on by it. It
Right.
won't even pop up.
And just as a reference point, we pulled questions for the actual report. We tried to make sure we had 1 or 2 questions that were reflective of what you're actually asking for in the application. So I think that's where we pulled out the stewardship of a collection. If that's something that's important to their organization, we definitely want to make sure that we're tracking that somewhere. So I think that was the spirit of that question. But again, if it's not applicable, we can take that out and send it to only the 2 or 3 or 4 that it does reflect.
If that's not too much work, I think that would probably be the best until we get submittable.
Sure.
Is there a question that the committee would prefer go in that spot for those organizations that do not have collections? No is a fine answer. It just is a bunch of white space.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
Is there anything you feel that we were missing when you were writing this? I mean, because we could come up with questions, I mean, by thinking it over.
So my initial list of questions that I sent to Lindsay, and I would assume the spirit of the questions that Lindsay sent back to me, we are, much like Cynthia mentioned earlier, trying to stay more on the side of operational questions. So I don't know that we are necessarily missing anything at this time in that operational vein.
Mhm.
So it could be that it's just I put not applicable
Yeah.
for them in the box
Mhm.
before I send it to them.
I'm going to rescind my thing. I think it's fine as is, looking at it that way, because they can just put NA down because they do it already on the application process. So I would say to speed this process up and not to create additional work, leave as is. That's my 2 cents.
Makes sense.
So then to breeze through the remaining questions, list any changes your organization has considered making to become more fiscally stable. We definitely wanted to have a financial question in there, but not one that made it sound like they're doing anything wrong necessarily now, or what opportunities to be fiscally ingenuitive moving forward. And there might be a better way to ask this question, but that's what we came up with. Describe what their organization used the funding for. Describe the organization's budget variance, if any, between the actual budget versus the board approved budget submitted in the time of the application. Were there any unexpected fluctuations, or did your organization in the year as estimated? We're not asking them for a total end of year or actual budgets. So this is just a narrative to say, here's what happened, or here's what changed, or any unexpected fluctuations. This could be a great opportunity to inform the next year's grant cycle, especially knowing that we're not moving forward with making emergency relief funding or anything like that. But just so we're knowing what the organizations are going through in a way that can the funding program better meet the needs of the organizations, or be mindful of in the application process as we create new applications each year.
Lindsay, that wording was a little bit confusing to me. I had to go through it a couple times. Are you really talking about the difference between a budget variance, the budget, the board approved budget and the actual budget, or the board approved budget and actual expenditures?
Ooh. Yes, that is a
Probably
good question.
expenditures. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think that should be corrected.
can do.
We can absolutely do that. There are no more comments on that section. Does your organization have any notable success, highlight, or community impact stories? Or guys, correct that, from 2022 to share. And this is just an opportunity maybe for marketing information to, if they have a really good story, we would definitely want to be in the know and help share that accordingly. What efforts did your organization make in 2022 to maintain or include other audiences, including diverse and underserved populations, such as communities of color and non-traditional users of art? And that is directly related to the applications question. Number 9 is, please use this section to tell us anything else. What any other supplemental information that you believe the City of Wichita and Cultural Funding Committee need to know about your organization or this grant? So this is just an open response opportunity. It's not required, but is an opportunity for them to tell us anything that they think we need to know. And so that's the annual report that we've prepared that would go out to the organizations, hopefully by December 1st at the latest, to give them plenty of time to prepare it for that January 31st deadline. That deadline is a little bit fluid. The big caveat is we don't issue payments for the next fiscal year without receiving that report. That's one of our mandates.
And just to make sure that it's clear, the character limits on those boxes are not to be limiting. We do say if you need more space, use more space, but I limit the characters on the boxes so that these pages can be printed. If you don't do that, then the text scrolls and it's useless if you print.
Very good. Any other discussion on these? I think with those 2 corrections to 6 and 7, we should be good unless there's any other feedback.
I just had one other question. I think it's a beautiful report, by the way. It looks really nice, which I think matters. So great job on that. But one thing I'm wondering about is, and perhaps this comes up as you all have conversations with folks throughout the year, but do you think it's worthwhile maybe to add a sentence to that last box, or a separate entry where I'm curious if they ever reach out to you with additional requests for support? Like, are there additional ways that your city friends basically can help you? I'm not thinking like more money, because that's what everyone's always going to say, but like if there's a technical support or assistance that you all could provide, do they tell you that in conversation? Do you think it would be worth adding here as an opportunity for them to share that with you, if that would be useful for you or them?
Personally, I think we could easily add that to number 9 to say this is to either give an example of things they could tell us, or you know, in addition to what you're saying, are there other types of help you think the city could be providing, etc.
That sounds good.
Yeah, we definitely have those as casual conversations or more formalized that are specific to the organizations themselves. Having an opportunity for free response where they might not know that they even could ask is definitely an opportunity to bridge some gaps. I will say, I don't know how relevant that would be to the cultural funding program itself, knowing that this is purely funding based. But as we're redeveloping the cultural plan, this is an area that we definitely want to be in communication with organizations and individual artists on how can the city better serve or better myth bust where the city is a service provider and where we can partner or help connect dots or connect
Yeah.
pieces together. So we can definitely
Right.
add in a question like that, especially going into this next year. I'm not sure how relevant it would be in future years, knowing that this is
Okay.
really funding specific program.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, if there's no more discussion on those forms, it's just 3 modifications potentially there to 6, 7, and 9. Good job. That looks good. Thank you, Jesse. Next on to the larger, I won't have time because we kind of ran out last meeting between the artist access and developing arts grants on what the purpose of those are, historically where we'd like to see them go, and what overlap there is with the current Arts Council. So just kind of want to continue that conversation and make sure we are doing as well as possible with those. Because I know Sam and I sat through that process last year.
Yep.
It was enjoyable. I wouldn't say it was a challenging thing, just trying to get the clarification. I can't think of the name of the opera in the school's organization.
Music on site.
Music on site, yes. We understood the need for that in the services and how we could actually, how they would fit in, because clearly they didn't fit into the larger grant process as a whole, to make sure they had the services to actually grow that program. So I want to make sure that we continue this discussion and figure out what we need to do to be more specific on those applications so that we are, help me out here, Sam, providing the right guidance or asking the right question or getting the right information from them. Is there anything else I'm missing, Sam?
For developing?
Yeah, developing or artist access, because they kind of, unfortunately, they kind of blend together as far as I think there's a little more focus on what our goal is with the developing artist access. I think is debatable what we're trying to accomplish with that, and even forcing them to plan so far in advance for their funding.
Right. So I think the artist access and developing grants are struggling with like a lack of purpose, because it's a once a year, look into your soul 15 months from now, what will you do for an individual artist is not helpful. And then on the other hand, like I said, like I've said this before, the criterion for developing is so onerous that it's like there's a unicorn that could apply. And music on site, I'm not sure. I think they got advice from city, right, Lindsay?
Yes.
And what did you recommend?
They did qualify for both developing and operational, hence they applied for both. I think if I recall what happened in the subcommittee that reviewed for the developing arts in particular, although they did fit, they requested programic funding versus operational funding.
Yeah.
So there was a big question mark with, is that the appropriate use of that fund? However, they did qualify and they ultimately did receive funding, as they were perhaps a stronger applicant in that category than in the general operating category itself. There was a question about their location and if they were truly Wichita-based organization, or if the funds that they would receive would be used solely in Wichita.
I remember that. What I don't have in front of me is the language for the criteria for developing artists. Is there, correct me if I'm wrong, is there language in developing that suggests that it's not just programmatic, it's not just operational, but it's actually like professional development or evolution of the organization, not programming, not keeping the lights on, but actually like developing the capacity of the organization, board building or something like that. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is directly from the cultural plan itself. providing funding and technical assistance to support small and developing organizations. So I do believe the spirit of this is to support the professional development of the organization, but it's a little tricky in that end.
And I think Sam and I were both arguing that for an organization like that, programmatic and getting those programs off the ground is part of their main thing they're doing at this point of their development.
Okay. Right. So I guess the question is really, what can we do short of a revision of the plan within these things to make this an opportunity that more people can grab at? Because there's just so few that qualify. And I think really is like, is there anything significant we can do for next year? I think this is the question, Dominic, is like, is there anything we can do about this for next year? It's going to make a difference in who's able to apply. That's the question, I think.
Yeah. And Lindsay, are you seeing number of organizations that you feel are unable to apply for the developing arts?
Yeah, there's a handful that I can think of off the top of my head that they're perhaps overdeveloped for this existing grant, but they don't necessarily qualify for operational. So the ones that come to mind would be Mama Film. They actually received a $50,000 NEA grant, which makes them ineligible. So they fit all the other categories, but their operating budget was too large, which was took them out of the running. Crown Arts Collaborative, Mulberry Arts Organization, Envision Arts Gallery, and I'm off the top of my head, I know that there's a couple more, but there were several organizations that reached out to see where they would fit within it, and unfortunately, they just didn't fit.
Maybe Wichita, Willis or two.
Was the money they had in there? Was it their budget was over the 50,000, or what other qualifications kind of barred them from it?
There were various points. I know years of operation when it comes to the actual operating grants, you have to have three years of operations, and not all of them necessarily did, but they might have been attached to an organization that did, or I'm sorry, for at least 5 years. So some of them were in a different window. I thought off the top of my head that this had a year category.
Well, it says you have to have a full season.
So at
Does
least
that mean you've done it or you will do it?
I believe that's you present a full season of programming.
Upcoming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
To your track record in that second bullet.
Thank you. To your track record, which I don't know necessarily that any of this is bad. It's a very strategic. You definitely want to be providing funds that are a good investment. But in the essence of a developing organization, what is years of service versus the amount that's being potentially invested actually look like? And this is where the $10,000 mark, to my knowledge, has not been anywhere close to achieved in the past as well. So there are opportunities. As a reminder, the cultural plan is under review right now. This is the plan that we will be going into the next year cycle with, but are there opportunities to either have an amendment or have a understanding that we know something will be changing, so we can make minor changes in the next year's grant cycle, knowing that it's an in-between. Or do we eliminate this section altogether and expand the operating grant section to meet those organizations versus, Sam, if I can quote you on, I feel like you've said unicorn organizations currently fit into
yeah.
And I would argue that I think the developing arts grant is probably more impactful for the organizations we would like to help from a community standpoint. So I think we can figure out a way to make this work for one more funding cycle, I think, if Sam and I can stay on there. But I would like to see for the cultural plan, this, and correct me if I'm misquoting you, Sam, broadened out to a point where we could actually have a greater impact on expanding the services in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And I will say, at the time that this was created, it likely did meet the needs of the program, looking at the organizations that had an intent of serving. But these organizations are all in a very different place today than they were in 2013. So as we develop the cultural plan, we are doing stakeholder engagement sessions and really doing a status update on most of our organizations and connecting with individual artists as well. So we know that this will change.
Good. So would it be safe to say it might be on us to help identify these unicorns for Sam's work, to have them reach out to you for information on applying?
Absolutely.
We will effort that, because I did feel that this was one where we had opportunity, and we only had just the one applicant, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think the sticking point in the language is just that full-time professional management personnel, an operating budget of 50,000, like those things do not belong in the same list together. It makes no sense. And I'm sorry, it didn't make sense when this was written either. Like that's not this, like people can read that and feel like Wichita Roads are like, well, we have people who work on this, but they're not full-time and they're doing it as volunteers.
Yes.
And
So
yeah, go ahead.
So sorry to interrupt, but one thing that we've communicated, or I communicate a lot this year, was full-time did not necessarily have to mean paid. So
Okay.
that it would not necessarily disqualify them from the category. Obviously, that's not the professional arts community that we would like to develop. We would like it to be paid full-time staff, but I agree with that $50,000 mark. That's pretty unachievable, or could be a deterrent to an applicant that just sees it. They might see it and not reach out for clarification.
And it's a combination of the two, because if you're being paid full-time and $50,000 pays your full-time salary and you're producing a full season of events, how does that work? Nobody does that.
I mean, I think to Lindsay's point, like early on when Fish House was around, it wasn't their job with that aspect of it from the nonprofit side. So they just had the staff doing it, and it was just a little side piece of that collective. Yeah, no, I think it's unreasonable now too. I'm just thinking historic stuff on there. And the more challenging one, to Sam's other point, was artist access, which is probably a greater discussion, again, with the cultural plan on what the intent was and where we are now with that professional development side of things. Because it's kind of limited, and having the argument of, like, for an instructor, yes, them going and get training does help their students, but we also felt that could improve their quality of performance of art and also bring back greater impact in our community if they're teaching that same lesson as well. But yeah, it was hard. I know last time we spoke about just forcing somebody to plan 18 months to 2 years in advance is highly unreasonable. And what options we have as far as finding to make it easier to provide funding for those people. Any other comments? Anything else we remember from that last discussion? Anything we could do about that?
I just don't know we don't have a lot of wiggle room, do we? Because we can only do this once, and it's funding for the next year, and it's pretty prescriptive about what it funds. So it feels like, I feel like, as I said here, I feel like we're trapped until the cultural plan. I mean, I have lots of ideas for how this could be revised in a new plan, but like what to do with this, like I don't have a lot of ideas.
So I'm not recommending this by any means, but technically, Lindsay, is it possible for us to set aside part of the money from 1 year, bring it over into a year, and then let the artist access apply during the calendar year for the funding?
I don't know, but I can definitely research that and get back. I will say you don't necessarily have to approve all grants at the same time. So we could have 3 different granting cycles or multi-granting cycles throughout the year. So even if we push back the artist access grant to be fourth quarter. So then they'd be closer to the time of
Mm.
execution of the program. I think that's something that we could actually do. I
Mhm.
don't know that we wouldn't be able to hold money over to different fiscal years for distribution, but when we make the decision on it, we could pull that out. It would be up to the committee to say, to dedicate $10,000 or a portion of the total allotment of the cultural mill levy to set aside for this. That's something definitely within your power to do, but would have to be executed in the same fiscal year.
Right,
I
and if we didn't
like
get
that.
enough money to pay, if we didn't get $10,000 worth of applications, we might eat that money then, not disperse it.
Yes, it could be readjusted though as well. So
Mhm.
one thing that we breezed through a little bit in the contract agreement is the mill levy does fluctuate a little bit. So the estimate that was provided is
Yes.
fairly accurate, but the exact individual dollar amount could fluctuate $5, $10, $20 here or there. So that's something within the fluctuation that we could definitely look at getting creative with. Are we able to
Mm.
adjust those funds? If anything, any additional funds that the committee did not distribute through the competitive funding could definitely be absorbed and distributed through the institutional funds. Not ideal, I would think, but better than that money evaporating on the back end.
And I like that idea for further discussion. If we could even push that to your point, making that decision be later. And can we find out historically, maybe over the last, maybe pre-pandemic, on average, how much we were giving away in artist access grants? I know we haven't done a lot in my 3 years.
Yeah, we can look through historical data and see what we can pull on that end. Look through past budget books. I do think it is minimal based
Mhm.
on my brief knowledge of the program. One opportunity that I do think we can be strategic in marketing and communication with prospective applicants next year is that their budget can be very vague and very loose. Obviously, you want to be reviewing something that is tangible, but I know in communicating with a few of the applicants this year is they didn't necessarily have to have an exact flight number or a receipt for a flight necessarily, but they could say, I anticipate my flight will cost $500 to go to this
Mhm.
program. So kind of myth busting what the committee actually needs, knowing that it's so far in advance. I estimate that lodging and conference fees will cost this, knowing that it's not published yet, or they wouldn't be buying their flight necessarily 16 months in advance. But they anticipate travel expenses to be a ballpark figure. So that's something that we can clarify moving into the next round of funding that we recognize it's pretty far out, but we don't need exact dollars.
I'm attracted to the idea of convening, it's more work for the committee, but convening a fourth quarter to deliberate separately on applications, because applying by December, applying in fourth quarter for an opportunity that you're looking at early in next year seems a lot more viable for people than, June, a June deadline. So
Mhm.
I'm willing to put in the time for that. I think that's a good tactical suggestion. I don't know if we vote on that or now or move or that, but let's continue that conversation. That sounds like a good incremental step to make this a little better.
Yeah, so I was going to say, have a conversation, add that agenda item, and I didn't write down what we tabled for earlier to have that for further discussion of the site visits discussion.
Yeah.
That I would like to kind of have a better idea how much money we've spent, because I don't think we've done more than a few $1,000s in artist access per year since I've been on this committee the last 3. No, I think that's a great idea, Lindsay, if we could do it that way. And I mean, as Sam and I can say, it really wasn't a lot more work. It was probably the least amount of work we did on this committee as a whole was that artist access portion. It was pretty quick turnaround.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here's an interesting idea from Nadine.
Yeah, I don't know if we've already discussed this. I apologize if we have had this conversation.
No, we haven't.
Okay, or if it's not on the table for one reason or another, but like, I'm just thinking personally, like putting up $1,000 and then getting reimbursed could be a barrier for a lot of folks. Is there a way that we could not make it a reimbursement process now or maybe later?
That's definitely an ask that we can work with finance on to see if it's possible.
Great.
if I can rewind just to the last statement, we'll also work with legal and the city clerk to see when the latest we could potentially review an artist access. Q4 could potentially make it difficult, especially with holidays, on getting
Yeah,
the committee to approve something and then getting it to city council for approval and getting an operating agreement solidified by end of year. I do think we can move it back at least a Q3, but I'm not sure how far back we'll be able to move it. So we can definitely do some research and get back to the committee on what next year would look like if we did that.
That is fantastic. Thank you.
great.
Those are good 2 items for next week or in next month to discuss. And on that, do we have a meeting scheduled for December? And is there any reason we need to reevaluate the timing of that before we look to adjourn?
Let me pull up the calendar real quick, and thank you everyone for your flexibility. Last week's art awards put a strain in our typical schedule, so I appreciate everyone's flexibility being able to meet today.
I
So I
was
have
also out of town.
One.
Yeah, it's currently scheduled for December 1. I don't see anything, but
Yeah, I think that would be fine. Then we'd probably January may be an issue with travel, but we can address that at our next meeting, just with people having vacation potentially.
And then we'll
If-
send out by December 1, we will also have the calendar for what next year's meetings would look like, so we can put those all in calendars. Jesse, if you can help remember to do that for next month.
Mhm.
easy peasy.
We are at 1:01. If there's no further discussion, if anyone would like to move to adjourn, I'd be open for that.
So move.
Second,
I'll second.
perfect. That doesn't need a vote, so thank you, everybody. Thank you, staff, as always, for getting all this put together. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah,
All right,
I can-
thank
no
you,
problem.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.